We're going to get started. This special meeting of the Board of Education for April 26, 2022 is called to order. This meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight we'll have an opportunity to hear from the superintendent and members of his leadership team about the budget proposal for the 2022-23 school year. Following the presentation, we'll have an opportunity for board members to provide their initial reaction and pose questions and items they would like to further understand and explore. We have various senior staff in the audience from our teaching and learning and student support teams who are also listening in this evening. Members of the superintendent's leadership team who are present here this evening will be listening attentively to questions and comments from the board. Staff will be here to provide initial clarifying answers. However, for tonight, we'll want to hear your initial high-level questions, comments, and areas that each director would like to explore in our subsequent budget work sessions and meetings. So thank you in advance. And with that, Superintendent, I'll pass it to you.
Are we without Director Hollins tonight? Oh, he's virtual. Hi, Gary.
Thank you. He's, can we confirm that we have him in the room?
Well, good evening, Chair DePass and directors, Student Representative Weinberg. Buenas tardes to our audience, everyone who's here present this evening, as well as tuning in from home, perhaps. Tonight's one of those milestone dates in the course of a given school year. I'm pleased to share with you this evening my proposed 2022-23 budget. It totals $1.87 billion. That's a big number. The title you see there came to mind for me, a sort of a working title here, Out of Challenging Times, we move forward together. Arguably, the last couple of years have indeed presented us with unique circumstances. We've never experienced them at this level in the history of public education, and it's made the role and importance of our public schools more evident than ever. So as we move forward, it's a critical time to support our students and school communities. I think in that we share that sentiment. So this budget proposes to invest in a comprehensive set of activities and key priorities that are intended to directly support our students and school communities as much as possible. As we emerge from the challenges amplified by this pandemic, we've placed a primary focus on expanding learning supports for our students. We've also identified prioritized next steps in the implementation of key district priorities and a set of strategic plan-related outcomes, many of which we've discussed here on many evenings previously. We believe these investments of time, effort, and resources will keep us on the path towards making our community-developed vision a reality and better ensuring the success of every PPS student. I believe this proposed budget this evening is fiscally prudent and responsible. It ensures maintenance and operation of the school district's necessary core functions, and it leverages one-time federal and state dollars to help address the learning and social emotional needs of our students. Tonight, primarily, I'll be joined by two members of my leadership team. First, Dr. Cheryl Proctor, our Deputy Superintendent of Instruction and School Communities, and Alberto Delgadillo, our Chief Financial Officer. Together, the three of us are going to provide an overview to you, directors, of our budget proposal and highlight for you key investment areas. And in addition to tonight's presentation, directors have now also received a copy of my fuller budget message and 2 volumes, I think there's a third one on its way, of the actual proposed budget. The public can find all of those related materials posted publicly. They are available. I know that we've all felt the consequences of the global pandemic. This is especially true for our students, staff, and families. Recognizing these actual needs, this proposed budget commits a deep level of investment towards staffing resources and direct student supports, which aim to promote positive learning experiences and supports at our schools as we move forward together. So I want to start off with a few guiding principles. Every student and adult in our school system has been impacted by the consequences of the pandemic. I believe an organization's budget serves as a moral statement of its values and priorities. So for us, we are directing all available resources to address unfinished learning, to support our students' well-being, and to try and improve conditions within our school communities to the extent feasible. In balancing a response to the myriad of real needs, we've attempted to be fiscally responsible public stewards of the resources that are available to us. A few highlights: we're committed to narrowing learning gaps for our students of color, in particular our Black and Native American students. We continue to allocate resources and staff equitably, putting more resources in schools with higher needs. Our proposed interventions and supports are there to address particular student groups, our special needs students, our English language learners. As a teacher, I feel strongly about supporting our classrooms and schools to be positive and supportive places of learning, where every student feels a deep sense of belonging, places where friendships, connections, wonderment, and laughter abound. We propose to continue to make continued incremental strides in building these kinds of positive conditions and experiences. This includes an emphasis on a well-rounded education, one with more access to the arts and career technical education, and making and building in more elective offerings for our middle grade students, for instance. As our Chief Financial Officer will share next, people make up the majority of the core budget of any school system. In the last few months, there's been a lot of speculation about whether there will be teacher layoffs. I can now share with you that no classroom educator, nor any licensed educator, will experience a layoff. Directors, these are some of the guiding principles and values that have guided the development of both our general operational budget and the targeted use of one-time dollars. After Norberto Delgadillo provides a budget outlook and review, Dr. Cheryl Proctor will cover and share details of the direct investments to our classrooms and schools. She will outline how we propose using more than $118 million to accomplish a few key objectives. As I've mentioned, addressing unfinished learning. Among the strategies you will hear are our plans to provide the largest academic and enrichment summer program in PPS history, and probably the state of Oregon. And you will hear her describe how we are proposing to hire additional learning specialists to support students become proficient in reading and math. We continue to increase learning opportunities for our students, including making class sizes more optimal across every school. We are allocating more than $13.5 million of both SIA and ESSER dollars to make good on a commitment to keep making continued incremental progress in this area. Before the pandemic, our community prioritized addressing the social, emotional, and behavioral needs of our students. We also know that the pandemic has had a toll on their overall well-being. Our budget will reflect our efforts to provide high-quality emotional, mental health, and wraparound supports. In addition, because it's important for our students to have access to fresh and nutritious food, I'm particularly excited to follow up on a concern that we shared with directors about investing resources to supplement federal monies that we believe are inadequate to ensure our students have access to more fresh and nutritious food, especially in our underserved communities. Our teachers and our school staff have the biggest influence on students and their learning. Our investments recognize their professionalism and allocate more than $16 million for planning, collaboration, and preparing to serve students, especially at a time when many need greater levels of support. And lastly, and this is not an exhaustive list I've just reviewed, we continue to make meaningful progress on our community's top priorities. I'll go into more details towards the end of tonight's presentation, but with these handful of priorities in mind, and with an understanding that the infusion of pandemic response dollars is finite and temporary, I truly believe we've been thoughtful and strategic in crafting next year's budget, and believe the choices we are recommending are the best ones available to serve our students. I'm not going to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer quite yet to give you this overview of next year's budget, but he will be explaining our recommendation for spending down $40 million of our general fund balance to offset the growing cost of operating schools, which I know directors are likely going to have a lot of questions about. Following our presentation, I would like to hear from directors your initial impressions, questions, and themes or topics you want to further discuss as we have these budget conversations and related work sessions. Please know that we have leaders from teaching and learning and student support services tuning in tonight as well. We'll capture your thoughts and be prepared to answer them over the course of the next couple of months. So thank you, directors. I'm going to turn it over now to Norberto Delgadillo, our Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you, Superintendent Guerrero. Good evening, Chair DePaz, directors, Student Representative Weinberg. Take out volume 1, and we're going to start on, I'm just kidding. I'm like, page 1. No, yeah. It's just spot check, just checking. No. Over the next few slides, I will share some key figures to build our collective understanding of the various drivers that influence our budget. So we're going to start with an overview. As Superintendent Guerrero shared, our overall proposed budget for next year is $1.87 billion. Given our deep investment in supporting our students and school communities next year, our general fund expenses are outpacing our general fund revenues. On the slide, you see $704 million in new revenue versus $744 million in budgeted expenditures. Therefore, we're recommending the school board approve the use of $40 million of the general fund balance. And I'll share more in a bit. I'll show more of that in a moment. And beyond our general fund dollars, we also receive special resources dedicated to directly supporting our students. This includes $38 million from our Student Success Act. And next year, we expect to use $65 million of the $75 million from ESSER, placing an emphasis to dedicating pandemic-related dollars towards addressing student needs. We also received $8 million from the State Summer Fund, which would be combined with ESSER dollars to provide the largest summer program in PPS history. Next slide. Total budget. As a reminder, the total budget consists of 5 major funds. The general fund, it's the blue slice of the pie, is $795 million. It is the primary source of dollars used for day-to-day operations of the district and includes funds such as the local option levy, arts tax, and the fund balance, or another way of thinking about it, the district's saving account. The red slice of the pie is a special revenue fund, which is comprised of several restricted programs. This includes student investment account, ESSER dollars, and federal funded programs like our Title I programs, Title II, and so forth, and our nutrition programs. Capital projects and debt service funds, the yellow portion of the pie, represent dollars for construction and renovation of school facilities, tech and curriculum, and also tax collections to pay those bonds back. It's a total of $760 million. All of these funds combined make up the total $1.87 billion budget. Go on to the next slide. So now let's talk about the general fund. As a reminder, the general fund is a primary source of dollars used for day-to-day operations. That includes the local option levy, the arts tax, and the fund balance. That's all part of the general fund. About 80% of the general fund is invested in people. This slide represents the various team members across the general fund. I would like to point out that in a previous version of this slide, the numbers between the category of management and business operations and the category of facility and student supports were transposed. So what we have on screen is the corrected version. And so about 75% of our team are student direct supports, such as teachers, principals, counselors, while 6.5% are teams that design and develop the curriculum and professional development, including teams responsible for student assessment and testing. Another 12.6% represent our bus drivers and colleagues responsible for the care and upkeep of our facilities, such as our custodians and maintenance crews. Then the remaining about 6% of the general fund budget personnel is made up of support management and business operations team members, such as IT, accounting, payroll, etc. Next slide. So let's talk about general fund revenue. The information on the screen is a comparison of revenue between this current year's adopted budget, so the blue bar, and next year's proposed budget, the green bar. As you can see from this slide, there are fluctuations across the various sources, whether it's property taxes, local option levy, and all of these result in a projected increase of $17 million of new general fund dollars, while the fund balance is also projected to grow by about $6 million. The net result is we estimate about $704 million in new general fund revenue. Next slide. Similarly, expenses. The following slide shows expense comparisons between this current year's adopted budget, which is the blue bar, and the proposed budget, the green bars. When looking across the various expense categories compared to this year, expenses are projected to increase by $24 million. The primary drivers are in salary and benefits, which are expected to grow by close to $30 million. Although the increase was offset by two cost-saving exercises. In the current year, central office has identified $6.5 million in savings, and in preparing for the proposed budget, for this upcoming budget, central office teams identified an additional $7 million in savings. Therefore, the net result is that our budgeted expenditures are projected to be $744 million, $24 million more than this year's adopted budget. Next slide. Given our deep investment in supporting our students and school communities next year, our budgeted expenses are outpacing our new revenues. Therefore, we are proposing and recommending the school board approve the use of $40 million of the general fund balance, reducing our fund balance from approximately 11% to 6%. In recommending so, it's important to keep our reserve fund policy in context, which in summary reads, it is a goal of the board to fund and maintain a reserve in the general fund that shall range from 5 to 10% of annual general fund revenues, with an expectation that the district will achieve and sustain a 10% reserve, and that there be a plan to replenish the expended funds within 3 fiscal years. Next slide.
Excuse me. I just have a
Yes.
quick question.
Yes.
When you're talking about the expenses, can you give us a dollar amount versus, and, with the percentage amount as well? So when I hear we're going down, from 11% to 6%, what is that in dollars?
11% to 6% is 91 million down to 51 million. So it's using about $40 million of the fund balance. Any other questions? At least I'll continue. And so on this slide, in an ideal scenario, the blue bar is the new revenue, is equal to or taller than the orange bar, the expenses, without having to rely on one-time funds. The gray line on this chart should be as close as possible to the yellow line, which would represent a fund balance of 10%. This long-term outlook does not include the expectation to build back our fund balance to 10%. Therefore, we recommend we gradually build back the fund balance by 1.33% per year beginning fiscal year 23-24. So not this upcoming year, but the following year. When you look past this year, the chart is a result of projections that don't take into account the change in decisions that will be required by this board to not only meet the board reserve policy, but also meet the legal requirements to submit a balanced budget. In other words, we will all need to work together in the upcoming years to adjust our expenses, lower that orange bar, and or, just as important, secure more revenue and raise that blue bar. Next slide.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
Quick question.
Go ahead, Director Hollins, I'll follow you.
So quick question. So once again, the 1.33% is how many in dollars? And also, when you talk about replenishing, what measures are you recommending? Are there talks about how do we replenish that?
So the 1.33% will vary slightly because it depends on what the annual revenue is going to be. So it could vary depending how much revenue we have. If we use our current numbers right now, 1.33% would be, I can do the math right now. It would be, so it's 90. It would be close to $2 million. Sorry, nope, scratch that from the record, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, so essentially 1.1% of building back the $40 million. I'll do the calculation in a second.
Maybe I could ask my question
yeah.
and you can calculate
Yeah,
while somebody
I'll
else
work the
answers my
other part of the
question.
brain, yeah.
I'm just wondering the assumptions of this chart, is that based on the enrollment loss that occurred post-pandemic will continue? Or what are the assumptions of this based on enrollment, since we have part of our funding is enrollment-based?
Yeah, so the assumptions built into this takes into account what our historical trend looked like from a state funding formula and our overall expenses. So over the past few years, our expenses have grown on average 3 to 4%, while our revenue, so when every biennium our revenue comes in from the state, on average has been an increase of about 4%. So it uses those as the measures to project out what the funding would look like.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm not being clear. This is based on some sort of enrollment projections, like the 8% drop or the 4% drop that we had continues, or, I mean, that we don't gain that, those students back.
We don't, and well, it's not that it doesn't take into account whether or not the students come back or not. Part of it is because the way the funding formula in the state works, there is still some adjustments that happen depending on what's happening with enrollment across the entire state. So when we start trying to, it's more difficult to try to make assumptions based on the enrollment and what's going to happen with enrollment in some of the other districts versus taking a look at our historical trends and say on average revenue is about, increases at about 4% historically, and our expenditures increase by about 3 to 4%.
Because that then
Yeah,
takes into account all the different ways that the revenue numbers are shifting,
Are-
not just based on
Not
your
just based on our-
student enrollment.
Yeah, but I guess one of the fundamental things is there is a connection to the number of students we have. And so I'm not asking about what we think was gonna happen with the others. It's just like for our district, are we counting that we're gonna be a 45,000 student district versus 50 or,
Not in this projection.
okay.
Adding to that, I'm curious what other assumptions went into creating the model. So if enrollment is one piece, what are the other assumptions that were, is it just those three that we're looking at historical trends?
Yep, it's just historical trends based on how much on average we spend over the past 4 years, pre-pandemic, and then the previous 4 years of revenue pre-pandemic.
So it's a forecast kind of based on the past, not
Correct,
moving
yeah,
forward.
it's a trend analysis, looking at how we've historically performed, what would that look like moving forward. And then as far as Director Holland's question with what is 1.33% equal to, that'd be about $13 million a year would be the goal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then,
I literally just came up with that too, around 13.33 million a year.
yeah,
But the other question,
and your
the other
follow-up,
question is, what measures are we looking to take to replenish that per year?
that,
From my understanding, I'm just making sure I understand. From my understanding, we're saying we want to replenish that within 3 years, right? So what other measures are we looking at or anticipating that we're going to use to replenish that?
well,
Thank you.
and sure thing, and to be clear, it's the policy that states this. So it's us abiding by the policy. And as far as the measures we would take, that's going to be a collective effort, because when we go through that process, that's not just a cutting exercise. That needs to be an in-depth analysis and review of all the different fiscal drivers, all the different strategies, collective assessment to be able to come back to the board and present the various options.
Just before we leave this little rabbit hole, also, there are some uncertainties around some of the sources of revenue that we can't bank on in this budget proposal, but that may, come to fruition. For example, FEMA reimbursement or any changes to our state revenue allocations based on policy decisions, post-pandemic changes, as we've seen a lot of in the last 2 years.
Correct.
So those
Yeah,
are all factors there.
We'll be entering this upcoming year, will be the last year of this biennial cycle. So we'll have a year's worth of conversations and engagement to have a good sense of what the next biennial budget will bring. And it does include one-time dollars. Yes, Dr. Holland?
Yes, I guess that's what I'm asking. So, when I hear based on the policy, that we're going to reduce the funds by $40 million, but there is no plan of how do we replenish that back to board policies, that it kind of makes me shiver a little bit, because if we have a plan on what we're going to use the $40 million for, but we don't have a plan or a method of how we're going to replace that moving forward. So I just want to make sure that I kind of understand that if I'm going to vote for, say, oh, we're going to spend $40 million down on our general funds, then that we have a plan or somewhat of an idea of how we're going to replenish those funds for the future budget cycles.
This is a good question, Director Hollins, and you recall last Tuesday evening, CFO Delgadillo brought before the board a contract to bring in ERS. It works exactly on this kind of question and analysis to assess for us, taking into account these projections. Some of them are going to be iterative. Enrollment is a variable. It depends on the enrollment and the return to home districts overall at the state and whether the pie grows or not. But there are trade-off decisions that we'll have to make as we sort of build back up the fund balance. We also have to, as you hear this presentation and all the work proposed, we're going to hit cliffs with our state and federal one-time monies. So it's not just building back the fund balance, but we're not going to have access any longer to the level of funding we've never seen in public ed with ESSER federal monies. And so all of those things are very much front of mind for us. We will, part of the question we want to answer is where did we see impact from investments, and if we can continue to a more limited level some of those activities, which ones are those that we are going to try to aim to hold on to in future years, because we won't have this level of revenue. And so we'll have to make some strategic decisions about not only how do we maintain a 1.33% increase in our fund balance annually, but how are we going to operate the school system when we have dozens of millions of less dollars a year?
Right, and that's exactly my point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I guess when I do our budget piece and we're looking at acquisitions that we're going to be doing throughout the year, we have a plan to say, okay, we're going to go buy 10 new trucks. It's going to cost us $1.8 million. Okay, those are going to come out. Well, now how are we going to do that? Are we going to do that through added fees? Are we going to do that through reduction in staff? How are we going to do that? So I guess for me to and I know this is just the first part of the conversation, but to me to be comfortable saying, okay, we're going to reduce our balances without having a idea or a plan of how we're going to replenish them before we vote on the reduction, it's just kind of my apprehension and cautiousness. Thank you.
I think there's no question that it's a risk, Director Hollins, and it's a risk on us, the board, because it's our policy. We set those goals as far as what the reserves would be. So that's our conversation to have. How comfortable are we with that without knowing what the future holds and what our future budgets look like, and how easy or difficult it might be to build back to where we know we want to be.
And I'll take that a step further. It's not just a risk, it's a reality. Use of one-time funds puts off cuts till later. That might be the right decision, right, as we're looking, and I think that's what the superintendent's saying, given where we are coming out of the pandemic, using a portion of those one-time funds to offset some of those reductions. But let's not hide from the public the reality. Using $40 million of one-time this year means the cliff is steeper next year. Now, maybe there's magic fairy money that comes from somewhere, the state or the feds, but I don't think we can count on that, right, as a board. And so we just need to be realistic about, delaying some of these reductions means more reductions potentially for next year or the year after. And I think Director Hollins, I completely agree. I mean, this is a conversation we need to have as a board and we need to have with our community, that the more of this we spend now, the more those cuts are going to be. And I think we should telegraph what some of those reductions are going to be so that we can talk about those trade-offs.
So just as a corollary, knowing what the underspend of this year's budget is, because I know last year we had a pretty significant underspend in some areas. So knowing what that is, I think gives us yet another piece of information, because it doesn't appear that we're spending to what was actually the adopted budget versus what the spend rate is this year. So just another piece of information for us to think through.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Director Brim Edwards. Every year, there's a budget to actuals reconciling that happens, particularly during this pandemic. The envisioned activities, didn't all happen during the time when, we may not have been in school, or staff vacancies that, those are salary savings as well. So all of those things will be brought together to try to sort of make up some of these gaps. It may turn out that maybe we save another percentage in the fund balance. It helps think about the activities we'll want to continue in the coming year. But I think Director Scott's points were right on. We can spend a little bit more now, but just keep in mind it'll hurt a little more later.
And so with all that in mind, right, so right, these are the numbers, but like, what's the story and the why for this recommendation? I want to turn it over to Dr. Proctor, who will then spend some time talking through our initiatives and strategies.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Norberto. Good evening, directors and Student Representative Weinberg. I am pleased to be here with you tonight. So our proposed budget investments hope to make next year a more powerful learning experience for every PPS student, educator, and staff. Tonight, I expect to highlight key areas where we plan on investing a total of more than $118 million. This includes $30 million to address unfinished learning as a result of the pandemic. It also allocates $30 million to increase learning opportunities for our students, including $13.5 million to impact class size. With $14 million of ESSER dollars, I am excited our educators and school staff will have more opportunities to plan, collaborate, and prepare for new curriculum and our emerging instructional framework. Right before the pandemic, Oregon legislatures passed the largest investment to Oregon schools through the Student Success Act, and I'm pleased PPS continues to align its SIA resources with the intent of that legislation, including investing $13 million of SIA dollars towards providing high-quality emotional, mental health, and wraparound supports. Next slide.
Before you leave that slide, and maybe this is just to understand, so these are big general categories, so there's 60 million. It looks like what would be sort of direct student services. Where in the budget document does it connect to, like, what specifically those are? Just, I can pull it up if you tell me where defined.
In which category were you pointing
Well, like
to?
the first two, it's $60 million, which looks like our direct, like, student supports.
So the way our budget book is designed, it's not an easy through line. I will share that, right?
I'll agree with you.
Yeah. So that's the hope with Volume 3, to be able to add. It's the first time, something we're working on. But from very as best explanation as possible, the SIA, the $30 million, you'd have it in our special revenue funds. That's where SIA and ESSER live. So when you look at our investments, would be Fund 205, and I forget what the other fund is, but they all sit under special revenue funds. So it's that red slice of the pie. And it would be broken out by then all the respective chart of accounts and categories that the state requires us to submit that information. So a lot of that would be sitting in those funds.
Also, if you do it, trace it not back to the sources of the funds, but to the activities they're intended for. If you go to the superintendent's budget message, under each one of these categories, it lists like 5 or 6 specific activities that those investments are going toward, like summer school or
Yes.
tutoring or whatever.
Absolutely.
This is true, and these are the right questions, and we had this conversation among ourselves. It's not easy to crosswalk back to all the org level budget, so in a future work session, we're looking to sort of articulate the line items under each of these categories, so there's no guesswork here. We want to be really clear about what activities each of these fund or prospective resources would be supporting.
It's critically important for the community, especially in a year in which school positions might be cut. If we're saying we're putting 60 million more in, like what is that? And how does it tie to the strategic plan and the board goals?
Okay, next slide. So as we've stated a number of times, the pandemic has interrupted teaching and learning, and we want directors and the broader community to understand that we are placing our emphasis on dedicating our pandemic-related dollars towards addressing student needs that came as a result of pandemic impact. We are excited again, and I'll mention it again about the summer. We'll provide the largest summer academic and enrichment program in PPS. And we expect to serve more than a fifth of our students across school communities. The superintendent's budget message details the array of programs being offered this summer, but I'll just highlight a couple of them here. First, our 4-week Summer Acceleration Academy will serve more than 5,000 first through 8th grade students at 25 PPS schools. Students will focus on making ground, improving and gaining ground towards grade level expectations focused on reading, math, and social emotional learning. And we also expect to provide more than 7,500 youth access to hands-on experiences, field trips, and academic tutoring through our partnerships with more than 20 culturally specific and multiracial community organizations. This includes over 500 summer jobs for youth. Addressing unfinished learning will continue during the school year beyond the 24 instructional specialists already providing targeted learning supports across the schools. We plan on hiring additional learning acceleration specialists for next year to the total of 20. These educators will be steadfast in working with our persistently underserved students, our Black, our Native students across targeted schools to make significant academic improvements in reading and math. These efforts are strongly aligned to meeting our board goals for student achievement, particularly across our most underserved population. Again, focusing on our Black, Native, Hispanic, EL students when we think about the data and some of those outcomes that we're seeing currently. We also continue to offer multiple pathways towards graduation for high school students. This budget proposal adds 7 teachers to the PPS Virtual Scholars Program to increase the number of high school students accessing self-paced, blended online learning. 6 credit recovery teachers who will work with students who need additional time to complete their coursework would also be provided, and more dollar towards evening scholars so that 5 schools can provide evening sessions, again, all targeting towards multiple pathways for graduation for our high school students. Lastly, we also expect to grow tutoring opportunities to students who need to make significant ground in reading and math. These activities under the category of addressing unfinished learning add up to about $30 million of targeted investments, which is what these investments were intended to do. I'm deeply thankful for what we're able to provide, and deeply thankful to our staff and community partners who continue to show up in service of our students, this summer and all year long. This work would not be possible without their commitment to the well-being of our PPS kids. Next slide. So we know that mastering core knowledge and skills is foundational to the learning experience. We also know that our students deserve a deep and well-rounded experience. We continue to make significant investments to improve class size maximums across PPS, redesign the middle school experience, and expand our visual and performance arts pathways and career and technical education opportunities. We know our middle school students need strong and unique support during this stage of their development, which also has been exacerbated and emphasized even greatly as we come out of this pandemic. So we continue to make things like a 7-period day more available to schools, allowing students in special ed, English language learners, and dual language immersion students access to more elective classes. We are also dedicating staff to develop school-level strategies to improve social emotional learning and school climate, especially in middle schools that need more support. Part of a deep and well-rounded experience also includes opportunities to explore career pathways as well as the visual and performing arts. As an educator, I strongly believe that arts education can be a foundational building block for public education. Next year, we propose, and we've stated before, that 75% of our schools will offer every student access to both a visual and performing art, and 100% all of our students will have access to at least one form of the arts, including students attending alternative high school programs. So here at PPS, more than 95% of students who participate in at least a year-long CTE program graduate. We've looked at this and we know this to be true. And even though we have more than 100 credentialed teachers and 70 state-approved programs, we actually continue to grow. And next year, 7 schools will launch new CTE programs as a result. I know that CTE is also holds a special place for Director Hollins, so hopefully he is very pleased to hear this. But it really is about the children and the communities and serving them to their fullest potential. So I look forward to touring these new programs and invite board members and Director Hollins to visit with me as we look at what our investments will bring. And lastly, we expect more than 450 students to attend school through our online learning academy. Our dollars continue to make our newest PPS program, which is that online learning academy, available to students and families, and that will continue. Next slide. So we know that our community values smaller class sizes, and next year, as noted previously, we expect to use more than $13.5 million from our Student Investment Account, SIA, and ESSER to lower class size maximums. Using these special revenues, nearly 98% of classes will be staffed well below the maximum class size thresholds, which we've continued to make progress in lowering. This means that across all of our elementary schools, 823 out of our 843 classrooms are currently projected to be staffed well below the class size goal maximums. The average class size across every first, second, and third grade classroom is projected to be 22 students. At schools that serve large numbers of Black and Native students and students of color, namely our CSI schools, on average will have a class size of less than 18 in grades K through 2. Next slide.
Can I ask just a question about that? Is this budget still predicated on the staffing numbers that were presented earlier this spring that showed, we have the big chart that has like what the class sizes will be by school based on the 108 staffing? So my question is mainly is this based on the same number of staff that was earlier proposed by the superintendent?
Yes. Come on.
It is data, or it's a yes or a no.
Good evening. So the answer is yes, these class size averages are based on the point in time when our reduction was a little over 100 staff. There's actually been a little bit of improvement, and we're looking forward to sharing that with you during one of the work sessions.
Like how much, I guess.
I don't have that number on the top of my head because the team's working on it. But because schools have finalized their staffing plans and using all of the dollars, which is something we didn't have when we first allocated staff, there's actually been a little bit more improvement here.
I also had a question. So I love the measure of central tendency, or like mean. Would it be possible to get like a range or a standard deviation to understand more about, like the average is great, but it also could mean, say if the average is 17, it could mean we have a class size at 10 or a class size at 32, and it would still balance out to 17.
We can certainly do that. We can talk about maximums and minimums and all of that. That's not a problem, Student Representative Weinberg. We know that class size averages are not experienced in every classroom, nor are they intended to be based on our equitable distribution of staffing resources to students that are more underserved. But I'm happy to get that for you.
Yeah, and I, just to build on, that's the whole reason I was asking that, because when I look at this, especially in the middle schools, there's a whole host of them, whether it's Ockley, Green, or George, that are in the sort of 29 to 32 or 33, not in the 20s. It would just be helpful to have that so we can.
Sure. As I said, I'll get it to you.
I want to make sure we don't lose the point you just made, because it's a really important one. This budget intentionally moves teaching resources towards the students who are most underserved.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when we're thinking about averages, which is important to look at averages, it's important to look at ranges. I really appreciate Student Representative Weinberg's question, have all that data, but again, this is intentional.
And
So there are going to be areas with larger class sizes, and there are going to be areas of the district with smaller class sizes.
Yes, and those areas with slightly larger class sizes are typically not schools where we see as much identified need. And at this point, based on preliminary analysis, lowering class size maximums would actually push more resources into more of our affluent and high-performing schools, and would not push those resources into our neediest schools because those class sizes are already smaller.
Actually, that's why I asked the question, because when I'm looking at George and Ockley, the numbers are still higher, and maybe that will be smoothed out when we get the numbers, but it'd just be helpful to know that, because nobody experienced a class as an average. They experience like what it is.
Understood, but I also want to be mindful that we have to display information in a way that's interpretable. And if we were to give you the size of every class in the school district, that'd be quite a lot of data.
Well, and you did.
We did do that. And we did do that.
And what we do have in the budget is the FTE per student by school in the volume 2, which is not exactly the same as class size, but it gives you a sense of the picture of how the resources are distributed across all the schools.
Yes, ma'am.
We expected that slide to generate some interest, so we'll be coming back to this topic.
Great, really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Next slide. Thank you. All right, so again, national and district data show a significant increase in the number of young people who report symptoms of stress, anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideations and substance abuse. Addressing the social, emotional, and wraparound needs of our students has long been a priority of our community. That is why next year every school will be supported by a social worker and/or mental health professional. These professionals help students gain access to basic needs, refer them to mental health services, and help them identify resources that will support their learning. We will also continue the same level of school counseling staff and funding 3 full-time certified alcohol and drug specialists. We continue our longstanding partnership with more than 20 culturally specific community organizations and are expanding partnerships with culturally specific mental health providers. These services, free of charge to students, help move our commitment forward for making targeted efforts to support students who most need support. We also know families are critical partners to the success of their students' learning. We plan on establishing the Family and Community Supports Team, which will focus on collaborating with families to support their children's education. Lastly, I know that Superintendent mentioned our use of ESSER dollars to augment and expand access to fresh and nutritious food. And as directors, you know, we provide close to 30,000 meals a day. Next year, we will use one-time dollars to do the following: grow our fresh fruit and vegetable program, giving students more access across new schools. And even though our grants are phasing out, we expect to maintain and expand after-school snacks and supper programs in schools with SUN programs, and expect to add new meal services and/or food options during the school day for students experiencing homelessness and food insecurity. Lastly, we've heard students' advocacy, including from students from Bridger Elementary. So we are now making significant progress towards replacing and reducing the district's use of plastic forks and spoons by purchasing reusable silverware. Next slide.
Just a shout out to our nutrition director, Whitney Ellersek. Thank you for your work in this area. There's nothing more important than making sure our students are fed so that they can be focused on ready to learn. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chief Delgadillo, where can we find those specifics on how much is being invested in the various programs that were just mentioned in nutrition services?
So nutrition services would specifically be in Volume 1. It would be under the special revenue section. And again, it's a very straight accounting type of document, so you won't necessarily see the narrative in that, and that would be subsequently something we would expand on in Volume 3. But the information regarding nutrition services and the federal dollars that go into that is part of the Special Revenue Fund.
And just a clarification, I love the fact that we're dealing with the issues of the throwaway silverware that all the students complain about, but that's not paid for out of the lunch program money. Is it paid for out of like a facilities or capital expense? Or it's coming out of the...
That's what it's intended to. So it's an interesting conversation when we think about the type of advocacy at the federal level and the opportunities that there could exist to really fund our nutrition programs, and we think about what's happening with the waiver conversation with the USDA and our reimbursement rates. There's something there to explore, but yes, Dr. Burr-Metworth, that all comes out of that funding source.
This is a great area to flag for our directors as elected officials. I know Congresswoman Bonamici, for instance, this is an area of importance for her. So reimbursements rates are not what they should be. We want quality and availability. You heard about our snack and expanded proposed supper programs, for example. The reimbursement rate doesn't cover, I think, what we'd like to make sure and make available. And like most districts, we're looking to supplement that because I know we want to do better.
Yeah.
But your advocacy in this area would be important.
One-time funds.
And I'd welcome our Director of Nutrition Services, Whitney Ellersek, to come up and share some more insight. But first, what meal did you work on today? Because you're out there all day.
I started the morning by packing 240 meals for our online learning academy students before I headed to a conference in Vancouver and met with Senator Merkley to advocate for our programs and supporting not only child nutrition programs but agriculture as they are interlinked, as well as expansion of pandemic EBT monies for our families. And then I came back here, and I'm here with you today.
Regular day, yeah.
Outstanding. The short answer, Director, is ESSER monies. I think we
Yeah.
can show what an impact that this makes, and so hopefully we can sustain this, even beyond the cliff, making sure our children are fed.
So to normally, Director Van Edwards, that all of the costs associated with our program are directly paid for out of our reimbursements. So our department is normally solely based on federal reimbursements. The last couple years, we've been fortunate to be able to offer all meals at no cost to our families at a higher reimbursement rate under the summer food program. That is going away June 10th, and we're already seeing substantial impacts with those decisions made by Congress. This is not a local level, this is not a state level, this is a national level decision. Those monies are meant, our federal reimbursements, if we serve meals correctly, are intended to pay for food, supplies, my staff, and the equipment in the kitchens, and any indirect costs as well. So it is a great numbers game that we have to play, but we do it very responsibly. And with this proposal, it would mirror, if you were here back in the day when we were starting to implement reusable plates. We actually received money from the city to make the first initial purchase of those reusable plates after we initiated a pilot. And so we'd like to mirror that with dollars from the district to do an initial purchase of reusable silverware where my team can help to implement, and we will attribute the labor and the ongoing costs with that, is the idea.
Just to illustrate a little bit more what's behind really prioritizing this, again, this is our students' advocacy and leadership at work here. It's been a couple of evenings and many school visits to places like Alliance to hear directly from our students who count on oftentimes this being their meal of the day. And so, for us, and Whitney's heard me say this on many occasions, can we do just a little better in expanding snack, food variety, supper that can go home or wherever our students are staying, and this is going to allow us that opportunity to start to make some real improvements there.
Well, and to your point, Director Scott, about just how difficult it will be to make these decisions when these one-time funds go away. I mean, we have seen firsthand, we have heard the stories from our families of how welcome it's been to have no barriers to free meals and to, snacks and weekend meal pickups and all of that. And so to have seen what that does for kids and what it means, and then to face the prospect of going back is just heartbreaking and really seems untenable.
Yes, thank you.
I had one question. Sorry, a little different, but same slide that we were just on. Where would I find the investment in the social workers, school counselors, and other healthcare professionals? And then along with that, is there any historical look at we're investing this much more than past years, and this is the impact we're going to see in schools?
Yes. So, if we, one of the slides has the charts and it has the general fund, SIA, ESSER. So with SIA and ESSER, those would be in our special revenue funds section of the book. And as far as the historical investments, that would also be listed in the same books or in the same document in the book. It shows you what SIA was the previous year. It's a fairly new fund, so that one won't go as far back. And with ESSER, it sits as a grant and as part of one of the funds. We would have to pull up a different document to then see the historical investments. And then as far as the impact on outcomes, that information's not in the book. It's essentially the type of information that we find when Dr. Adams' teams does test assessments. We look at map data, so it's just part of those conversations. But from a fiscal perspective, it would be the special revenue fund.
It's a great question, Jackson. These are exactly sort of the topics we want to surface for our work sessions. We don't want you to have to go fishing for it, so we're happy to provide a historical graph. I'm confident that social workers is an area historically where I think we're the best position sort of we've been ever, and consistent with the spirit of SIA, which is much more sustainable as a funding source and its spirit of what it was intended to be. PPS has followed through on that. So for our work session, we'll try to have a table ready for you so it's clear.
Yeah, I love the FTE equivalents.
Yep. And some of that information exists in the book as well. Yeah.
Okay. So before I turn it back, another question?
I have a few questions. So going back with the nutrition service piece, what would be the cost from the amount that we are getting now? Was that different from the cost we was getting now to what we're going to be getting for next year?
There you go.
Maybe Whitney can give you a quick response, and we can also prepare a longitudinal view there.
Director Hollins, if I'm interpreting your question correctly, we may be facing a 40% reduction in reimbursements starting in the fall.
And how much is that in dollars?
So the average national reimbursement is projected to be $2.91 for every free lunch. Pre-pandemic, for a paid eligible meal, I received 39 cents. And then the difference was to be made up by the parent copay. We are very fortunate, though, to have a lot of support at the Oregon State legislation, that we have had support for families, that while the federal programs recognize a reduced price category, the state of Oregon has been paying the copay for families for breakfast since 2009 and a lunch since 2015, I believe. So we've been trying to advocate for direct monies at the state level to impact the impact of families, to encourage and their participation, to decrease barriers, with a 30-cent copay for every breakfast and 40-cent copay for every lunch on the family side. So while those are not dollars that come directly to our department, they are directly can be felt by the families. Similarly to the Student Success Act, we were actually included into that piece of work, which was very heartwarming and exciting to see, where we were able to expand our community eligibility provision, or CEP, number of schools. So we initially started with 25. We had to reduce down to 13 in 2017. Because of SSA, we were able to expand to 50 schools and programs, which we would be able to implement hopefully moving forward into the next school year, along with an expanded income guideline category for our families that would increase free meal access up to 300% of poverty, and an increased opportunity for SNAP benefits up to 200% of poverty. So while I do see a potential for reduced reimbursements from our side of things, we also are trying to really advocate for family eligibility to support our families first.
Great. And other thing, so is there anything that we can invest in now for the nutrition service? Anything additional we can invest in now that will increase the availability of our kids getting free lunch moving forward? All our kids getting free lunch?
It's a wonderful question, and I think my brain goes to multiple pathways on this. Obviously, as the superintendent stated, advocacy at both the state and the national level is incredibly important for this. And I would say, too, the opportunity to look at another valuable resource is time, and how we make the cafeterias welcoming and inclusive, another learning lab for our students, and making sure that the way in which we serve our students is equitable and available and visible and is not carried with the sense of stigma and shame.
Yes.
You know,
Thank you.
by circumstance, we've made some progress here by removing the barriers. It has inadvertently, happily removed a lot of the stigma, and we found a much higher percentage of students having school lunch. So we want to keep it that way.
Thank you. So, as I bring my portion of the presentation to a close with this last slide, prior to turning it over back to Superintendent Guerrero, I want to share that I know how essential our educators and building leaders and classified staff are in creating a thriving learning experience for every student. So this is the last area that I want to touch on and how we plan on using targeted dollars. We expect to use more than $16 million to offer professional learning opportunities. These are opportunities for our educators and staff to plan, collaborate, and prepare. As we develop our instructional framework that aligns to teaching and learning tools, practices, and expectations across classrooms, we are committed to providing opportunities for those educators to learn professionally. We expect the following, that educators will have access to more learning opportunities, including 3-day summer teacher institute. We continue to expand on our well-received letters training and continue to roll out our social emotional learning supports to schools. We will continue to support school administrators so that they have the knowledge and tools to effectively coach and support their teachers. And we know that our paraeducators and educational assistants are essential partners in the classroom. Therefore, we are excited to increase professional learning opportunities to paraeducators so that they too have the knowledge and skills to support teaching and learning of the new curriculum adoptions. And finally, before I turn it over to Superintendent Guerrero and to close out this portion of the presentation, I would just like to say and thank our teachers, our principals, and our myriad of staff in the Office of Teaching and Learning, in the Office of School Performance, and also in the Office of Student Support Services, who have really diligently put their thinking and their best collaboration together to come up with this package of supports and services that we are investing in to enhance the possibilities for our students and the outcomes for each and every one of our students. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Guerrero at this time.
I have a question, and I'm glad you said the outcomes piece. I'm wondering, what is our specific projected outcomes of these investments? I got 3 questions. That's one. The other one is, how do we identify success as well to know that these programs, these investments are working? And when we talk about emotional, mental health, and wraparound support, I know for a lot of kids that's out here with a lot of this gun violence that's going on now, where do security play in a role with that? Because we know if kids feel secure, they can learn better. And as we talk about the emotional, mental support piece as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that question, Director Hollins. So with that, and with all of these efforts, each of the divisions and departments for each of each of these initiatives and how we are spending these ESSER dollars, there are a couple of things. One, we are accountable to state reporting criteria and guidelines to monitor our impact and our effectiveness. Each of our departments is engaged in developing, those those measures, outcomes, monitoring efforts, and assessments for effectiveness through their department improvement plans. And finally, with our investments around mental health and the support for our students, we do have targeted measures that we are taking to support just the crisis that's occurring around violence, and the needs, the comprehensive social and mental health needs of our students. As I mentioned before, in the plan, we will have dedicated drug and alcohol specialists, but also we are dedicating dollars to identify and build a team around violence prevention and response. And those things are some of the investments. And for each of those things, Director Hollins, as we continue in our budget discussions and through our various work sessions, will be able to outline more specifically exactly what that looks like for you.
Thank you, Dr. Proctor. Thank you, Director Hollins. It's the right question to ask. How can we be assured that, these investments, this combination of activities, are going to have the outcome that we want to see on outcomes for our students? And this is why we remain committed to coming back regularly to look at all of those indicators and, ask ourselves those questions. We want our school communities to ask themselves those questions. We have to model that as well. And so it's going to be really important to be clear about which ones are impactful, because we're going to have to make some difficult decisions, a year from now, around which ones we want to make sure and hold on to. This is why the use of one-time money is just like the council recommends. You want to dedicate to building capacity, because that's what you're going to be left with. And so hopefully you're hearing a lot of strands of work there. Let me continue on to just a couple remaining slides for you. So again, as we emerge from this pandemic, we really are excited and motivated to accelerate work on a number of particular community priorities I wanted to highlight here as we close out. As an example, and I want to thank directors for participating this past Monday again with Black community leaders and educators as we talk about not just the concept, but what does it actually include in partnership with our community to launch this concept from a practical sense on a Center for Black Student Excellence as a place, as an approach, as a constellation of school communities. Thank you to our Da Vinci student artists for the artwork here. So that is an area where, again, staff today talked about really, being motivated to really start moving in actual ways there. Another area, and I know it's come to your attention recently, we're remaining focused on the success of every Native American student. It's a student group we know we need to do better with. We're honored to partner with our Native families and staff to create a roadmap moving forward of success for their student achievement. Just as examples, those of you who participated in the recent weekend listening sessions, thank you for being there with me and the team. That includes a continued commitment to supplement dollars with Title VI to strengthen our Indian education program. This is yet another area where your advocacy is going to be important. You heard about federal reimbursement on nutrition programs, but there's all of the title programs. we know we need to do more by some of our student groups, Migranet, et cetera. It's the same with IDEA. The council continues, member districts from the Council of Great City Schools continue to encourage our elected board members to really push our congressional leaders to think about a long overdue contribution at the federal level for IDEA to support special education services. Districts all across the country are having to supplement to really sort of meet that need. So that's another area. Other examples of the way that we're prospectively looking to continue supporting our Native students, that includes supporting our Montessori program, our Native-centered Montessori program at Far Beyond K-8. We spent quite a bit of time charretting, what does a Native-centered summer program look like taught by Native educators. So I know that there's been a lot of conversations with our Indian Parent Committee over the last couple weeks to really sort of outline what that looks like. That's something we heard clearly from our Native community that they want to see. So we're excited to launch into that as another one of our summer program options. On another district priority, in response to the recent climate crisis response policy that students and you all worked so diligently on past, we're going to begin taking our initial first steps. That starts with auditing and assessing the district's footprint and making actionable plans in those key areas of becoming really green buildings, energy efficient, waste reduction, sustainable transportation. So, and we'll continue updating related climate curriculum to reflect the importance of climate justice. So that's another area where we expect to make some inroads. We're also committed to every PPS school being led by a strong school leader who's equipped to lead with a lens of racial equity and excellence. We'll continue to allocate dollars to supporting our school leaders, investment in their leadership development and professional learning, and supporting their professional learning communities. We're also going to continue to leverage private dollars, including our 5-year, $8.2 million philanthropic grant that we pursued and were subsequently awarded from the Wallace Foundation to help continue to develop and support a racial equity-centered leadership pipeline. So we have a candidate pool, a workforce that can be prepared to lead our school communities as well as support the ones that we have. And then lastly, because we didn't really mention it here, and we've spent many evenings talking about it, and just in honor of Dan, who's sitting here in the front row, we're going to continue to leverage our voter-approved school modernization bond dollars to continue building, renovating, and making safety improvements to our school community. So we're going to keep investing in those educational improvements. Remember, part of our last campaign included those curriculum adoption materials, which are starting to make their way into our schools. Thank you to our teacher educators who've been part of that vetting process. We're going to continue to focus on improving our special education learning environments, updating our school sites to accommodate changes in their capacity, and making progress on ensuring that our facilities are accessible. I know that we had quite a passionate evening talking about the importance of making sure we can guarantee that over time. So we've reached an important milestone this year. We're also fully digitally enabled as for learning, technology-wise as a school district. So thank you to our community's investment. It helped to guarantee that as well, that every PPS student, grade 3 through 12, has a technology device to use at home. So just in the way of next steps and closing thoughts here, and look forward to turning it over to you for your first impressions around the dais. Want to highlight upcoming opportunities for directors and for the broader community, where we fully expect to dive in, ask some deeper level questions, do the double click, engage in dialogue with various staff leaders, particularly who are leading strands of work that you heard just highlights from. We're anxious to hear your feedback. Already this evening we've taken a lot of notes. We'll be ready to sort of dive a little deeper into some of those areas. Just in the way of process, again, the board is slated to vote and adopt on a final budget in June. And please note that the budget proposal, it's iterative. It continues to evolve. We continue, including again today, to receive new updates from the state on updated revenue numbers. So we're eagerly working to continue reconciling our budgets to account for some of these changes in our resources. And then just lastly, directors, this budget, I think, represents tangible steps that we're proposing to support progress towards our vision of supporting student learning and their success. As educators, we're aware that the many challenges involved in transforming a larger school system, including the very many real constraints. However, we're going to continue to approach our work with optimism, creativity, and the deeply held notion that we must and we can do our very best to meet these challenges. And I know that you all agree. I know that our teachers are committed to it. The students of Portland Public Schools deserve nothing less from us. So I want to take a moment also at this time, just in the way of this process, to thank a whole team of staff, particularly our budget and finance team, in addition to many people who were involved in providing input in the development of these plans and in the preparation of the proposed budget and all of the related materials. I hear that it's a lot of late night reading, but thank you for your investment of time to dive in. So with that, staff and I look forward to hearing your first impressions. We have many team members, both here present this evening and many more listening in, who are noting your initial comments and questions, so we can be sure to focus in on these areas at our upcoming scheduled work session. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Superintendent. So just to recap, I heard a desire to get more information about that special revenue fund and how that was, to provide the line items under that fund, the 200, the account. Interest in learning about the nutrition services and what we can do now to stave off those reductions or find ways to increase, or find ways to solve for kids so we can have access to free lunch for all of our students. I heard a strong desire to get a breakdown of the FTE per school, per year question, the class size question, and so not to dive down into not average but actual, particularly at our schools that we know the data show us have greater need. There's a desire to understand how our investments in this budget will translate to increased outcomes, positive outcomes, particularly for our Black and Native students. A question about how we'll know we'll be successful. Director Hollins, to your point, what are our how are we defining success? And I'm sure I didn't take very good notes, but that's what I've got. Do we want to go through Director Holland's additional impressions or anything that you'd like to see covered in additional work sessions?
Okay, so I'll start it off. Yeah, so initial impressions, going back to the superintendent question. The initial impression, I appreciate, and I'm working on appreciation and accountability. I really appreciate all the hard work that went into this. I think it's definitely a comprehensive budget outlook, especially for the initial budget outlook piece. I do have a little issue with the timing of it. For me, I think it was just a little bit premature to have this meeting with only having 3 or 4 days to go through over almost 1,000 some pages of information. I will have, and I understand, that things happen and things, other things happen to prevent us from getting it a lot sooner. But to kind of try to start reading through this stuff with this short amount of time was really difficult. And I didn't really feel as prepared as I would have liked to be in, had I had more time to, process a lot of the data that was in the books. So other thing is I would like to at least look into more of the safety piece. When I hear that we have swastikas at places and at schools and our kids is exposed to this stuff, I would really want to know what are we doing around security. When I look at our 2017 bond, there was money in there for security and upgrades. And I believe in the 2020 bond, there was monies in there for security as well. So I wanted to really know what are we doing security-wise to help maybe deter some of these things from happening, whether it's cameras and or other forms of security measures to help hopefully prevent some of this stuff from happening. Because I could imagine how troubling it is if on a regular basis that we're having these offensive, obscene gestures go up. And so I would want to know what we're doing with that, since I know we have money for those in two bonds that has passed. And the other one was the summer funds piece. Are those one-time dollars? And if they are one-time dollars, how are we going to supplement that for the next summers to come?
Thank you, Director Hollins and Director Scott.
Great, thank you. So I do have some questions. I do want to, Director Hollins, just to your point about time to digest the info, I just want to make sure that we all understand as a board that this is actually, this meeting is required under state law. The goal of it is actually for the budget officer, which in our case is the superintendent, to propose the budget to the board. So actually, I just want to make sure that board members, there was no expectation. I mean, if you have initial thoughts, if we have initial thoughts, we'll share them. But that's what I think next week's work session is, to dive even deeper, and then the sessions after that even deeper. So I think we will have time. I hope we'll have time. I plan to do that. I appreciate, Superintendent, you and your team in terms of how you have sort of found a balance. I think that's going to be the important conversation for us as a board is, that balance between use of one-time dollars, looking at the ongoing, looking at the learning loss, looking at meeting the board goals, right, going forward. And did, have we sort of hit the right place there? And I think that's a very good conversation for us to have, and not for us to have as a board, and for us to have with the community as well. I am very concerned. I'm going to echo Director Holland's points from earlier. I want to talk more about the impact of using $40 million of our general fund balance. It's not just a large dollar number, but a large percentage of it. And I guess I want to get a sense of what the future risks are to that. So sort of what, if we do that this year, what does that mean for the 2023, 24, 25 budgets? What kind of cuts should we be anticipating as a result of that? And if we were to spend less of the one time now, how does that impact those future cuts as well? So I don't know if that's easy to model or not. I'm sure it's not easy, but if we could start modeling that, I think that would be useful. To the question of class sizes, I'm really interested in learning more about the supports that are given, supports that are given to schools with larger class sizes, because I know this has come up in the past that, as we look at averages, which are useful, and then we look at ranges, which are also useful, I know that some of the schools that have larger class sizes do get additional, educational supports. And so I know, for instance, with Markham, because it was a Title I school, it lost its Title I status, still, was sort of very close. You and your team have been able to sort of come forward with some of those additional resources. So just getting a sense of when we look at those numbers and we see some of those schools that still are at the high range, what are the educational supports that those schools need, in order to deal with a class of 32 or 33, which is of course large. And then finally, I really want to, I don't want to dive too deep into it, but I'm wondering how easy it would be, I'm wondering if there's any benchmarking around administrative costs and sort of getting a sense of what the appropriate administrative costs are in a district. You mentioned early on, I think 6.1 or 6.2%. So it's already not a large part of the budget, and then of course there have been some reductions this year. But getting a sense of what's appropriate, and I know benchmarking is really hard. It always sounds really easy. Let's just look at other districts. But finding like-sized districts, that are similar, that benchmarking usually is done by, they're usually you have to contract it out. But sort of understanding a little bit of if there is information there about what those costs are, because I want to keep coming in, and people who have served with me on this board for a couple of years know. I'm going to keep talking about these things. It's really easy to make central admin into the boogeyman, and it's really easy to say, why don't you just cut there and add teachers, and forgetting about the impact that those things have on schools. I mean, it's the communications work, it's the school supports, it's the strategic planning, the hiring of teachers, the onboarding of staff, it's the tech support that keep the students online, and it's the financial controls, right, and contracting work, and making sure that we're spending money wisely. And so it's hard to say what that exact number should be, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that decimating your central office actually also decimates your school district. And so I want to make sure we have a sense of where are we right now? Are we too low? Are we too high? And what does that mean in terms of moving forward?
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I'd love to build on what Director Scott just said. And my question was about the dollar amount that we cut, the $6 million and then the $7 million from central office. I'd love to see some of where that is, because again, I think it's when we don't know, it's like this, there's just magic that we can cut all this stuff and it doesn't impact our schools. And so I want us to be clear on what we have cut and some of the strategy around that, so we can have some clarity. Because I do think there's a lot of really important things that happen at BESC, and I appreciate the diligence to really streamline that, but I think it helps us to have clarity around that. I'm going to ask this question because it's what I heard Director Holland say at our intergovernmental committee meeting, and part of, I think, Gary, what your question was tonight. But what would the dollar amount need to be to have no barriers to food for our kids? So if we wanted to continue with absolutely free food, I don't think it's something we can do in this budget. I don't think it's something, that the cost would be too high in other strategies and to our staff. But it would be nice to have maybe that amount to work towards, to say, if it's $60 million to make sure every student has access to food without any barriers in our system, what would that look like? My initial impression of the budget, again, is the amount of work. Having served on CBRC, I appreciate the idea of that third volume. When I was on CBRC with Director Moore, former Director Moore, we encouraged CBRC to do a one sheet of the budget to try to help with some of this is where this money goes and how you can find it in the budget book. So I'm looking forward to that volume 3 potentially being a more robust version of that. I appreciated the breakdown of the funds with that red slice of the pie that had what is ESSER, what is SIA, what are those things that have targeted uses, to be really clear that money can't just be used for whatever we feel like. I thought that was a helpful graphic. And again, the reminder that we have a legal requirement to submit a balanced budget, that as much as we might want to do certain things, there is, like, as you always say, Chief Delgadillo, it's a pie. So we have to cut up what we have, and we can't add things in if we don't know where the revenue is coming from for it. So I really appreciate that reminder as well. I'm looking forward to that conversation about how the investments we're making support your strategies, Superintendent. And I know we got, a high level view of that, and I know we'll get more on that. But again, the reason we're here is to serve our students. And I know that that's why you're here, and that those goals that the board has around 3rd grade reading, 5th grade math, high school readiness, and post-secondary readiness, that how are we gonna see those percentages grow, and our hopes for that with these specific investments. And I think as we continue to Director Scott's point, have the conversations about where we're resourcing staff and especially investing, as we looked at the equity dollars. And I think Director Constam, you were the one who mentioned that if you look at the amount per student, you see higher numbers of amount per student at our highest need schools. And so some more about how those strategies we're hoping that they're going to play out. And then again, that'll be up to the board to continue to monitor that. So thank you everyone for your hard work. And I appreciate the graphs. There were several graphs and charts that made it much easier to digest some of these really big numbers and really big concepts. So appreciate that. Straddling the line between clarity and transparency and giving us all the information, and like you said, in a digestible, and maybe it was Dr. Adams who said, interpretable, digestible way.
Thank you, Director Lowry.
I'll be very brief, outside of saying
Prove it.
I know.
Did I start a timer?
I spent the last couple days trying to figure out how to get the red line between all the different things between Volume 1 and Volume 2, and realized that Norberto is truly geeked out on this stuff. Like why he loves this so much, I don't know. I got a headache. But in any case, a lot of work went into this, and so I don't want to discredit that at all. I want to commend everybody for the work that they did. I came tonight not with the idea of asking a bunch of questions, but I wanted to hear what you were putting forward. So I came tonight with the intent to take in information, make more notes for myself, so that I can ask questions later about the double click around where the money is going and how that money is going to be directly impacting our students and the teaching staff and the administrative staff of the schools, and making sure that they're getting the supports that they need. I'm glad that Director Hollins brought up safety. Because in a season like we're in now, where we just had another homicide of one of our PPS students, and we had another shooting, and this is all in the past week, of kids that go to our alternative schools. I don't want us to take for granted.
It was a former PPS student.
Former.
Yes.
They're all students. It was PPS. The one that was, okay, let's not get me into this, because I can tell you where they went to school. I can tell you who some of the teachers were. So please,
what you can
let's not
say is
get
that
me involved in this, because the issue that I'm wanting to bring up is not to bring fault on anyone in this space right now, but shine a light on This is about shining lights around safety of our black and brown students. And whether they were a former student or a student currently, to me, I do life with these kids. So I see them religiously. I see them through the week. I see them after they get out of school. I see them while they're in school. So to me, they're always my students. Like if you ask any teacher in the space, once you're a student of a teacher, you're always the student of that teacher. So I want to forgive me, but, and I hear you in that we do not want to say that like this is like they were in a classroom right now, but they're still the family members of people that are in our classrooms right now. They still have to come by the school. And when you're sitting in a classroom trying to wonder about, is the person, are they coming up here? Your head is on a swivel. It's hard for you to learn.
Yes.
And so that's the only reason that I was bringing this up. And I do want to appreciate, and I'm sorry, I apologize, Jonathan, because I know that's not your intent. But the safety of our students is extremely important to me. Is extremely important to me, and I'm concerned about whether or not we're making sure that the workers that are now supposed to be providing that safety, are they getting the adequate training that they need so that they can do that effectively? Because guess who's not supposed to be doing it? The teachers and the students. So that it's not the teacher's job to provide the safety, and yet the teacher is having to deal with the unsafe environment. And so that's the only reason I was bringing that up. Is not to shine a dark light on anybody. It's only to say those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to. I'm also wanting to hear more around our what we're doing with athletics. Because athletics play a huge part in keeping our kids busy. I love the fact that we've got new about the new CTE that was coming in. I think that is absolutely awesome because all these things give our kids something additional to do outside of regular classroom hours. It keeps them busy, which keeps them away from other things that draw them into negative behavior. So it was only to commend. I only wanted to speak to commend because I know that this team is working really tirelessly. You're working really hard to make sure that that these things happen. And it was to say, I'm really looking forward to the double click talk when we can start really going into what's in this subcategory. Because I looked in the back of section 2, and now I'm finna really be quiet. This is close number 5 for the black preacher.
Is that on the high end of closes, or is that on the low end?
This is the top. So all black preachers get 5 closes, and it's just a thing. And I'm on number 5 right now. I didn't even give y'all 3 and 4. I just jumped to 5. But if you look into the appendices and you go into all the different accounting codes, you start to see where all these. So when you start going back to the subsections and you start looking at the funds and you start seeing this is 1280, this is 111, this is 2190, all of those you get to go to the back, and now you start to see the subcategories that make up those things, which are now saying everything under this is getting some of that money. And so now we get to dive into, okay, so exactly how much money is subsection 12.214 getting, and how much money is subsection so-and-so getting, and how much money is this section getting. Now we're going to get down to the brass tacks. So that's what I'm actually looking forward to. And so I know that we didn't have time to go into that tonight, but it was exciting to read, as if I can say that. After you got past it, I started geeking out like Norberto. That's why I got all these lines on here, and I got all this writing to ask questions about what the heck is this? And how much money are they exactly getting? And when is that going to happen? And how much did they get last year? And is it the same this year? And why isn't it the same? I got all kind of questions, but tonight wasn't the night to ask them. Tonight was the night to say, Norberto, thank you. Thank you so much. You've got an amazing head on your shoulders. You've got a great team. Dr. Proctor, thank you. Thank you so much for going in and putting in all the work and all the detail. Now get ready for phase 2 when we get to start saying, okay, what is this? And what is this? And what is this? Because I want to see a lot of programs get some money, And then they're going to be saying, well, maybe they don't need to get all that money. And I'll be saying, well, maybe you don't need to get no money. I want these programs. And so we're going to be going back and forth up here while y'all going back and forth out there. And at the end of the day, I want us all to keep in mind that the thing that we're making the priority is the kids. So no matter how we slice this, it's not that I can't go out to eat with them afterwards. It's just, we're talking about how to get the kids what they need in the most appropriate way possible, because we all love our kids, we love our families, and we love our communities, and we love y'all for actually taking the time to do this work and making it work for us. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and I look forward to the next part of this.
You want to go after that?
I do, because I'm going to only have one close. But unlike Director Green, I'm going to have a bunch of questions. So I figure one close, but lots of questions. But I'm going to start with like appreciation. First for the taxpayers and the state legislature and the federal government, because I'm looking at the list of things that we've added to our budget. And since in the last 20 years, and certainly an acceleration in the last 10 years, we have the Student Success Act, Ballot Measure 98, which paid for a lot of our high school success work. We have a $100 million local option, the bond, outdoor school for all, the art tax, and money from the federal government, both ESSER and for the summer school. And I'm just very appreciative that we have a lot more resources, because it gives our educators and our leaders an opportunity to make the investments that when we only had the general fund, there was a lot less opportunity. So first, appreciation to everybody in this room and the broader community for the support, the support. And then when we get down to how are those monies being used, I'll start, this is more of a process, but appreciate the detailed staffing information and also the budget information. I am appreciative of the recognition that this was a 2-year period unlike any other period in time, and that we have to think very differently versus we're just going to make the same investments. So I'm appreciative that we've done that. I love that there's summer programming, that there's a commitment to the counseling, tutoring, more professional development, more learning specialists. I love that virtual scholars for summer credit will be at more schools. It used to be at one school, and if you didn't get into that, you didn't get an opportunity to either accelerate or make up credit during the summertime. I'm appreciative of the enhanced career and technical investments. I think that's what will get kids passionate about going to school. More active to electives for middle school students, climate and sustainability investments, technology and curriculum investments. All those are great things. So I hope you all let that, before I ask my questions, you just take that all in, because I'm going to now ask some questions. But I really love that those things, I think, will be meaningful to our students. I think will engage our students. And this is a year in which we have to engage our students in a totally different way after the pandemic. So I appreciate that. And I also want to just point, I guess, recognize Director Holland's point about the budget, and Director Scott's, that we just got it. But I will note that in less than a month, we're being asked to approve it. So now that we've had the presentation, there's going to be, I think, some pretty deep work that we need to do if we're going to be ready to approve in less than a month and then adopt in less than 7 weeks. So I think this is a topic every year when the budget calendar comes up, that we give ourselves enough time, both staff to put it together, but also enough time for us to, certainly this year when there's lots of different funding streams and one-time money and permanent money, that we make sure that the community and the board understands what it is that we're investing in. So with that, I have some questions, and some of them are, I think, should be pretty easy, and other ones, I guess I'll just get them in the queue. Let's see, where should I start? So the I'm going to go back to the, I'm going to start with middle grades equity, something I've been talking about for 10 years. And in 2018, we put some additional money into the under-enrolled K-8s so that there would be an over-investment in those schools, just because with fewer students, the opportunities for students to have a variety of things that would engage them was less. So I'll be interested, and since we still have some K-8s for another year, and especially some under-enrolled K-8s, but when we open Harrison Parks, we'll have fewer, but what are we doing this year for those under-enrolled K-8s? Have we swept out the money out of those schools, or are those investments still there? Of the 108 positions that were cut, I guess I will be interested in the next meeting of knowing like whether those are still there. I would be also interested in knowing that there is an identified 7 million in savings that were identified that was incorporated in this, and I'd like to know specifically what that was. Were they positions that weren't filled? Were they contracts? Or, what specifically was that? And especially were there ones that were non-school positions that have been eliminated? Then, let's see, just to Director Scott's point about the and this maybe falls on the savings too, the administrative expenses. In the audit response, Secretary of State's audit response, we said that we now have a new budget software that's expected to improve monitoring and analysis of spending patterns and authorize adoption of software that allows analysis and spending comparisons with peer districts. So it seems like that would be, we've got a tool to be able to look at that, because I think you're absolutely right. It's always the perennial question, like what about, especially in years in which there may be reductions, there are reductions in schools that we know sort of where we're doing on the other front. There's a slide that has the 80% of our budget is staff, and it has the percentage numbers. I'd be interested in like actually what the numbers are. And then if it's 80% staff, what are the 20%? What's the other 20%? And where we'd find that in the budget? Like, is it, there's a number stuck in my head from previously that our professional service contracts are about 60 million, but that may be wrong. But just interested in like what's that other 20% if it's not people. Let's see. In last year's, this is going back to the averages versus actuals in some of the schools, and I know we've heard from individual school communities that have co-located programs and just the differentiation within a school. So you may have a focused program that has a very, because you can't join it late, low class sizes, but in the neighborhood program, much higher class sizes, which makes for a reasonable average. But if you're in the neighborhood program, that's not there. So really looking at, we heard from beach parents that were in a focus program, but concerned about the neighborhood program and the resources. So again, sort of a deeper dive and the click down on that. And in last year's budget, there were 28 total, although it's probably more actually partial ones, 28 total privately funded FTEs. And I saw in this year's budget book there are, this is the foundation funds, there are some listed, and I'd be interested in sort of how those play out in terms of, so 28 FTE, that's about a third of what the staffing positions we have taken out of the schools, or that were taken out of the schools earlier this year, so I'd be interested in what that looks like. And then the climate investments, we got a little peek at that from the superintendent tonight, so I'd be interested in more like the scope 1 and scope 2 that we're doing so that we can set the targets to hit our net zero by 2040. And the last two items, I really appreciated the detailed on the summer programming that's going to be offered. And most of the programs, the specific programs that were mentioned, they talked about the number of students impacted and how many days, or like some sort of unit of what the ad was. The exception for that was the special education summer programming, and it didn't talk about the number of students, and I don't know if there was a reason why we didn't talk about the number of students, but like, what is that extended school year? You know, how much of additional learning will they get, instruction will they get? As the group that I've at least heard anecdotally have been really impacted by the pandemic, that seemed like the one summer programming that was specific to special ed students, so really interested in what that looks like. And the last item, and this may be sort of cleanup at the end, and I could look at the third quarter financials, but like, where are we on the unspent budget? Because to back to the conversation of Director Scott and Director Hollins, that if we spend down the reserve, you know, what does that mean for future reserves? How do we fill it up? Well, obviously, if you don't spend all your resources, you have some one-time additional resources. And it looked like from just a conversation that we had earlier today about the spend rate, that might be a place. Again, you don't want to count on it unless it actually isn't spent, but it's a potential. At least the place I used to work used to vacuum that money right up. I mean, if it's not used, like you have a position that wasn't open for 6 months, and you have the funds, so like, how do we utilize that strategically? So those would be my questions, and I've got a number of other ones, but just at a high level. But really appreciate all the work that went into that, because, you know, if we're looking at 1,000 pages, I just think like how many versions of this staff went through to create a budget in a very, very complex year with the multiple funding streams. So really appreciate everybody's work to bring this here tonight.
Thank you. I've got about 5 of the questions you asked. I didn't get the rest of them. I'm sure I'll refresh us.
I'll send them. I'm going to type them up and send them through.
Thank you. Student Representative Weinberg.
Sure. I'm going to keep on with the appreciation, especially the section in Budget Book 1, the informational section. I think it's really important to see like how our funding decisions for school psychologists are made, or like administrators, like how are those decisions made? What are the ranges of students, population that allocates to that? I think that's super important, because a lot of times we see like just these numbers, this is how we allocate to schools, this is like the thinking behind that, so I really appreciate that. Also, education works in acronyms a lot, and you have a whole section on acronyms, which I very much appreciated. I think has been asked for a couple times, so I appreciate seeing it there. Also, to Director Green's point of safety, I think there's the like sense of safety, like having supports, like that's safe. But it's also the students feeling safe, and that plays into the school psychologists, counselors, educational training, school class size, and of course facilities. So I would love more information just on, I already said it, but the FTE allocation for school psychologists. I see in here, but not so much for counselors and drug and alcohol, and, I'm missing the third one. Social workers, yes, thank you. So I'd love to see that. I believe, or it was not. I was going to say it was in the FTE allocations, but it was not. The second thing is I'd love to see the updated version of the class sizes by school, especially since that disaggregated it by focus or DLI program and neighborhood. And I think that's all. But thank you for putting this all together. It's, again, thousands of pages. And I've only just started reading it, so thank you.
No quizzes.
Hopefully you're getting credit for that.
I had a couple of process questions or comments just about our engagement with the DSC and with the CBRC. I know we have some of our community budget review committee members here tonight, but I think it's just really important that they have the time and the access to the staff to do what we've asked them to do, which is give us their recommendations and their comments. So I'd love to hear back on just what that looks like, and also what engagement with the DSC looks like, and how we're going to get that student input back on the budget process. Appreciate that every year, I think the format of the budget is becoming a little more user-friendly and digestible. And I told Norberto, I think you even increased the font size, which is, that's a good thing. But it's definitely easier to find things and to see the connections with our strategic plan and our board goals, and also to beat a drum that I have been on for the last 2 years. I want to talk more about how we are showing our federal investments, our ESSER investments to our community. I think we've done a pretty good job here disaggregating them and showing not just how much we're spending, but what programs those are funding. But I think it's really important that we do that in a way that's easy for the public to access, that discrete pot of funds. And that's also best practice. So I think we've done a good job, but we can do a little better, and we want to make sure it's on our website and all that. And then just back to Director Scott's point about our appetite for the risk in terms of sort of future decisions after these one-time funds are gone. I think we need to have a values-based conversation in our next work session just about the reserves, and be able to identify really clearly, this is what the one-time money is funding. This is what's invested in terms of capacity building. This is what's actually funding additional FTE. I think we have, $13.5 million from SIA and ESSER to lower our class sizes. So that's a really direct example of something that will really hurt when it goes away. And it'll be very difficult for our community to adjust in the wrong direction when it goes away. So I think we all need to make sure that our eyes are wide open about what those investments are doing. A lot of them are targeted, as they should be, to very clear pandemic recovery needs. And hopefully those needs get better as we go along. But I look forward to having that conversation with everybody. And then also, what are the revenue sources that might change for the positive? So you've identified that there's maybe about $10 million in potentially reimbursable funds through FEMA. When will we know whether we're going to see that money? How variable is the amount of money? And then what are other sources, either state or federal, that might be in play that you can put in the budget because you can't take it to the bank, but that may be coming in for the positive? I'd like to hear any of that. And I don't want to kind of bury the lead of the superintendent at the beginning, which was you did unequivocally state that there will be no layoffs here, which is not something that we were quite able to say the last time we talked about staffing allocations. So I think that's
certainly true with our certificated educators.
Yeah. And then, likewise, just that values-based conversation, like, let's be really clear in terms of nutrition services and all of that. What is one time? Let's have a conversation about what that looks like when that might go away, in addition to advocating strenuously to the feds to never go back. Also, I'm interested in the letters training. I think you outlined, Dr. Proctor, training 250 more educators, and I'd like to just hear more about, is it a budget constraint that is limiting that to that number, or is it a practical constraint in terms of how many people can take part in the professional development? Because I think when we're talking about our board goals, we need to really talk about our literacy crisis, and what do we need to do to really change what we're doing in terms of helping our students be proficient readers. And there's a lot of evidence around that strategy, and I know, Dr. Proctor, you believe in it, you've invested in professional development there, so let's talk about, do we need more? Do we need to get more teachers through that training? And let's see. Interested in special education because just in the budget, it's very just straightforward that the formula for special education investments has not changed. Although there is a reduction in the special education budget because there is a projected reduction in the number of students being served. So I'd be interested in having a conversation about how many of our students are in special education, what other services are they receiving that aren't, coming specifically from that budget, and, I just like to learn more about where that budget is and what the changes are on a per student basis, and what the justification is for keeping that flat as an allocation formula. Really happy to see the pretty significant level of investments for our English language learners. That's something we haven't seen for a long time, and I believe that's general fund money. Is that general fund money or is that one-time money?
I'll jump in. That's general fund.
Yeah.
Money. Yeah.
So that was really gratifying to me because that's been a sore spot for me for a long time, and we know we need to invest in those students, and we know we need to do it in a number of different ways, not just our newcomers and our older students. So that's a good thing, and I think those are all my questions or comments. Multiple pathways, also, that was a pretty significant investment, and part of that is a direct connection to our enrollment. So we still have a lot of kids that we have lost. We've gotten a lot back, and we've done a great job. But I think that is really important, both getting our kids back to graduate from high school, but also just to re-engage all the way down to middle school. And we can't do that if we don't have the teams that are out there on the street, finding them, figuring out what they need, figuring out what's the right environment, what's the right school. So I was really happy to see that because, frankly, that's not often at the top of the list. So I just look forward to having these conversations with everyone, and thank you very much.
I'm going to go last because I think we've heard from everybody. There's not a whole lot I can add in terms of what I'd like to see followed up on. But I want to start out with appreciating Director Hollins. That was a great way to start off our inquiry here. With deep appreciation for the team that put this work together, and even the people in the audience. I mean, here we are, it's after 8 o'clock at night. I think what we all have in common is nobody here works a 40-hour week. And so I just want to appreciate all of you, your advocacy and dedication to doing excellent work, exemplary work, not just adequate work. A couple of things I'm interested in is this notion of safety, and I'm curious what it looks like to invest in safety for Black and brown students. So, we talk about safety and having, resource officers in schools, which is a thing of the past, which might have helped some students feel safe. But when, as Director Hollins mentioned, swastikas and N-words are scribbled inside our buildings and outside of our buildings on grounds by, maybe they're even our own students. I wonder what we can do to invest in environmental design, whether that be in murals or landscaping. I used to work for the Parks Bureau, and you can prevent crime somewhat by environmental design, by increased lighting, cameras, murals, artwork. People are less likely to spray paint murals, etc. So I'd love to look at that. I also, Director Constam, want to appreciate you for talking about having a values-based conversation about what these trade-offs look like for next year. When we come to this cliff, when we have no more one-time funds, and potentially even talking about our contingencies and reserves policy. Like, is that helping us or hurting us, and how much flexibility we have there? So I'm curious about the future of the budget, what kind of trade-offs we're going to be making. What is the universe of trade-offs? What are we looking at? What's our menu? And I believe that's it. I don't have anything necessarily to add from what my colleagues said, but really wanted to focus in on the safety and the future budget, not necessarily for this coming year, but the years following.
Director Pass, I had two other things I just wanted to mention. One, there's been a fair, and I'm not quite sure where this lands or even if it's in the budget, but there's been discussion about just the equity of out of classroom experiences like field trips and whether there's room for some sort of district level sort of equity-based fund on field trips. Because as we've pondered, instead of having like telling the schools that are currently having a lot of trips, like you shouldn't have trips, let's is there the opportunity to provide more out-of-school experiences for those students? And the other thing, it's a small item, but the accessibility of our boardroom. It's not ADA accessible, as was evidenced by the meeting that we had earlier, and I don't know if that's a big fix or a just sort of routine fix, but that seems like that would be, if we could put it in the budget versus the next bond would be great.
That's excellent. Yeah, thank you for that. The field trip thing does not have to be taking away from other students. It can be additive. I think that's, we're using our equity lens. We're not taking anything from Buddy. We're adding to, trying to increase opportunities. So thank you for framing it that way. Do we have any additional questions before we adjourn or final closing statements?
Just thank you, appreciation to you. There was no expectation that you fully digest all of the material. Tonight's objective was to present the budget proposal to you, share a few highlights of what you can continue to read more detail about. Our task is, not to take all the fiscal coding that we have to, are responsible for, but to try to make it as understandable and community friendly as possible. I have no shortage, and I know the staff was listening, of ample notes of all the areas. I think that pretty much fills out our work session agenda. So we'll take all your questions and put them into categories and go through those so we can do the double click, and hopefully in the process we'll answer some of those questions. I already see that I think we can prepare some digestible summaries in some of these areas so that you have the specific line items and activities that each of these broader categories will support by dollar amount. And certainly there were a lot of questions around specific FTEs across the different areas. So I think that's all certainly information that we can prepare for you, and certainly class size is a popular topic we want to dive into a little bit more. So thank you for your comments and questions and your impressions this evening, and we'll look forward to the next occasion.
I had one very quick question. I'm sorry. Just a clarification on the no layoffs for the certified teachers. Does that take into account like attrition rates for teachers? So we're not laying off teachers, but there is going to be some attrition that we won't be filling.
There's a few different ways to answer that question. I don't know if I want to put our chief of HR on the spot with this one.
I just have a question. I don't understand the question, Jackson, so maybe you can help
Okay,
me.
I'm sorry.
Like, is it that, yes, we have fewer teaching spots than we had last
Yes,
year?
that was the question.
But nobody has lost a job, but people have retired
Yes.
and resigned. And is
Yes,
that what you're asking?
that is the question.
No, it's 88, right? 88 FTE. Yeah, so I think you're asking, were there reductions in FTE for the PAT group? And I believe the number when we last counted was 88 FTE. But we don't have any layoffs because of attrition. Is that what you were referencing?
Yeah, that was the question. Thank you.
Yeah.
But is that classroom teachers, or does that also
It's
take
all
into
PAT
account the
numbers.
certified
Yeah, so
teachers
what
in the
we-
other positions?
Right, so social workers, counselors, all of the other licensed professional staff is in that group. Yeah.
We could keep going. I think we're adjourned. I appreciate your question and your response. Thank you.